Hi, everyone. Welcome to the broadcast. My name is Becky Robinson. I'm the founder and CEO of Weaving Influence, and I'm so thrilled to be today with Michael Parker and Glenn Parker for this webinar on the positive influence leader. As you're coming in today, we want to let you know about a few technical considerations for today's event. And the first thing that we want to do is invite you to engage with us today throughout the event in the chat. So if you could take a moment to take a look at your Zoom panel and identify the chat. And as you do, we would invite you to please use the drop-down menu to select all panelists and attendees as you speak with us in the chat so that we can all see your comments. And what we'd love to hear first is where you're calling in from today. And many people attend our webinars as a part of their personal or professional development. So if you are here today and part of an organization and you'd like to tell the name of that organization, we'd love to give you a shout out. I'm seeing folks from all across the country. It's amazing, and some international attendees as well. Welcome at Markham LLP in Lyndhurst, Ohio, and welcome at UC Berkeley. Welcome in Saskatchewan, Canada. And these are coming in so fast, so if I miss you, I apologize. We have someone from Bennett Thrasher in Marietta, Georgia, someone from Des Moines, Iowa at the ITA group. We do have a caller from Spain, someone from Southeastern Freight Lines. So thank you for choosing to invest with us today in your learning. And it's so exciting to see all of these international callers, someone from the State Theater. It's great to have you with us. So throughout today's event, we would invite you to share your comments and questions in the chat. We do have some special guests prepared who are going to share their positive influence leader stories during today's event. And if you'd like to choose to participate by sharing your thoughts on Twitter, we would invite you to use the hashtag positive influence leader. Now, one of the questions we always have about our events is whether or not we'll have a recording available. The answer to that is yes. We also get asked if we will be sharing the slides from the event, and the answer to that is also yes. We will have a PDF of today's slides available, and they will be in the follow-up email that we'll get out to you along with the recording later. So we want to make sure that we have plenty of time to talk about this amazing topic of positive influence leader. Michael and Glenn do have a book with this title that's released this week if one of you wants to hold it up. But let me, before we begin, take a moment to introduce our two authors today. Michael Parker is a senior executive with 25 years experience and success in financial services. His areas of expertise include strategic growth, business development, relationship management, marketing, and PR. Currently, Michael is a managing director of Rockefeller Capital Management. And our other author is Glenn Parker. And if you didn't guess yet, this is a father-son author team. Glenn is a best-selling author with more than 40 years experience and an internationally recognized team building and organizational development consultant with some of the world's leading organizations. So Michael and Glenn, we are so thrilled to have you with us today. And we want to jump right in so that we can all be learning together. So let's start with this. What is a positive influence leader?
Becky, thanks for having us, and thanks to everyone who's listening today and watching today. Appreciate people coming from all over to join us for this particular topic. So to answer that question, I want to tell you a story. I want to take you back to my first job out of graduate school, my first boss, and my very first performance evaluation meeting. The meeting's going well. My boss thinks I'm actually doing a very good job. I have to tell you as an aside that my job entailed essentially doing research and writing reports. So it was pretty boring, actually. And so we get to that point in the performance appraisal meeting where we talk about my development plan. And so I had been watching the people across the hall in leadership training, and they seemed to be having a lot of fun. They were traveling all over the country and outside the country, conducting workshops and coming back with great stories about the events and the travel and all those sort of things. So I said to Larry, as part of my development plan, I'd like to observe a leadership training class so I could see, what it's all about. So Larry says, well, as a matter of fact, Glenn, I'm traveling down south next week, and I'm going to be conducting a couple of workshops, and you can come with me. And however, he said, I really can't justify uh, your travel expenses unless you conduct some of the training. Well, my lips start to quiver. And I'm saying, what do you mean, conduct some of the training? Larry, I don't know anything. How do I teach somebody something? I don't really know anything. He said, Glenn, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. We'll be able to do something. And we did. And I did. I conducted 2 hours on the second day of the 2-day workshop. And I said, wow, this is what I want to do. This is who I am and what I am destined to be, if I could put it in those terms. My true north, my reason for being. And that, from that day on, I sort of pivoted to learning and development as my true north. And so that's when I didn't realize it at the time what Larry had done. And it was a very simple way. He had changed my life and changed it for the better, because I found this is what I should be doing with my life. And so, and so it's influenced me to this day. And so let me stop there and let Michael, let Michael tell his story.
Okay, great. Thanks everyone as well. I appreciate the opportunity. So my story is similar in that it was with a first boss as well, or first real boss of any substance, named Mike as well. And he was a superstar field executive leader in our industry. A gentleman I just admired everything about him. He just had remarkable presence, and he was one of these people that knew how to be firm on issues without being firm on people necessarily personally, and packed this unique ability to influence behavior by establishing trust in a relationship and by showing that he cared, especially when it really mattered. Later on, we'll talk a little bit about the concept of a teacher influence, positive influence leader. And he was one of these. And so like my father's performance appraisal, this one sort of was odd in that mine sort of took place in a locker room, oddly enough, post a basketball game. And it's a story that just really changed my career and changed my life in a lot of ways. At that time, I was interested in moving on to another opportunity inside of our company, and it would have meant moving away from working with Mike, who I had learned everything at that point that I knew and had just had great admiration for. So he wasn't opposed really to anyone's ambition, but at that time, he really didn't think that I was ready. And so he turned to me in a rhetorical sense, asked me this question. He said, "You know what I noticed about you?" And I said, no, I don't. He said, "Well, what I noticed is you never seem to finish the job all the way through. You're always looking for the exit door before you can actually measure your contribution. And why is that?" He asked. And so no one had ever been so honest and so direct with me about what they really saw. It was sort of putting that virtual mirror in front of my face, and I needed that truth, and he gave it to me. It hurt, but it really changed my life and my career from that moment on. And here's was this takeaway, and it really was defining, which was from that moment on, I said to myself, I'm going to commit to finishing the job that I started, but I'm going to do it with a laser focus on getting the results, exceeding results before moving on to the next project or opportunity. And that was about 20 years ago. And I have lived up to that and embraced that ever since. So it was really career and life changing.
Great. That's a great story. We asked a number of people who were going to attend this webinar to talk about their experiences with a positive influence leader, and many of you were kind enough to share your story and be willing to share those stories with us. So we have 3 people that have said they're willing to talk on screen and tell us their particular stories. So if we can call on those people right now, it's Julie Reed, Lorraine Hardaway, and Patricia Bax. So
And I have added all three as panelists with us. And so if you're able to unmute your microphone and share your stories, we would welcome you to do that at this time. And if you're able to share your cameras as well. Julie, would you like to go first? Maybe not Julie first. Are you able to speak?
Yeah, can you hear me?
hi,
Yes, we can.
Okay,
hi,
perfect.
Julie.
Thank you for inviting me to be a part of the panel today. I shared a story about 8 years ago. I made a career change. I started in a CPA firm and then spent about 15 plus years after that in private industry accounting. And I kind of got tired of crunching numbers, and needed to reinvent myself, and was provided an opportunity to look into a software company in a project manager position, and I interviewed for that. And the person who hired me was a game changer in my life, because she believed in me, really is where it started. And that's all she really needed to do. And like Mike said, she was super honest, because I didn't have a project management background. I didn't go to schooling for it. She just saw qualities in me that she thought would make a successful project manager. And so she was very honest during that time, but she never used negative feedback in order to move me forward. She always just said, hey, don't sweat the small stuff, keep moving forward. These are the things you need to do. And she always constantly gave of her time to make sure that I understood things, that she mentored me. And I've always had that in my career. I've been very lucky. I know not everybody has, but I've always wanted to pay that forward.
Julie, thank you for that. That's a great story of someone seeing something in you that perhaps you didn't see in yourself. And that's exactly what happened to me. That's exactly what Larry did. He saw something in me. I thought I was, good at looking up stuff and doing research, but he saw something in me that I didn't see. And also, what I'm hearing there, Julie, if I can, is that this was also somebody who was a teacher, even though they didn't carry that title. They taught you things, as we like to say, that you needed to know in order to be successful at your job. Does that resonate with you?
That absolutely is. She taught me how to be a project manager, how to organize, how to understand a project life cycle. And I've been let go during COVID, which has been, crazy, but another company, a CPA firm, picked me up that has a software practice, to be able to do that job. So she set me up for success in the future as
I
well.
love it. That's a great story. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Sure.
Patricia, you want to share your story, which I think is absolutely fascinating. I love the story. Please share it with us.
Thank you so much, Glenn, and thank you for inviting me to share this story. I was born outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and my family moved to near Buffalo, New York when I was quite young. But every summer I would spend with my one aunt on a farm that my grandfather owned. And it was kind of boring. All I basically did was gardening, milking cows. I actually delivered a calf. All those little fun things when you're 12 years old, you get to learn about. My other aunt said, why don't you come and spend some time with me? So I did. And she said, you know what, have you ever thought about learning to play guitar? And I said, well, I fell asleep at my first piano lesson, so maybe guitar might be a better choice for me. So she started teaching me. And then she said, how'd you like to swim this summer? I said, great. So for several summers after that, she would teach me guitar. My parents bought me a guitar, and I would be swimming during the summer. Years later, when my aunt passed away, my mother said to me, I have to tell you something. And I said, okay, what is it? And she said, well, did you know your aunt did not know how to play guitar? She didn't know how to swim. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. I said, I never knew that. She said, well, when she was teaching you, did she ever play the guitar? And I said, no, you're right. I never noticed that. But what it was, and I realized this years later after my mom told me this, was that she believed in me. She built up my self-efficacy, that I could believe in myself. I could do those things, and I never knew she didn't know how to do them, but she had a belief in me, which is kind of the common theme I'm hearing from other people, that you could do whatever you put your mind to. And when I went on years later to become a substance abuse counselor and then also a registered nurse and worked in counseling education, I learned the importance of resiliency and what we call protective factors, and how important it is that people believe in you, because when they do, you thrive more in your environment. And it is a skill that you can take with you, like Julie said, no matter where you go, wherever your life leads you. So that's my story.
Patricia, great story. I love Aggie.
Thank you.
That's there's a good example of what we call being a supportive, positive influence leader. Somebody who says, "I'm here from you. You can do this." So yes, and at the same time also teaching you things. Again, another somebody who is a teacher without title, and yet we find many people who were teachers and effective positive influence leaders, but who didn't hold the title of teacher or professor or instructor of something like that. So that's a great story, and I want to share with you, Patricia, because you remind me of one of the people that we interviewed for the book. Her name is Shernette. She actually was born and raised in Jamaica in the West Indies, and she was raised by her grandmother, who was very strict with her, insisted that she go to school, that she study hard, that she get good grades, and when she didn't get an A, she had to answer to her grandmother. Her grandmother also taught her life skills like cooking and sewing, and so she became a very well-rounded person. And the absolutely fascinating thing about Burnett is that later on, her grandmother got cancer and actually passed away from cancer. And this influenced Burnett to go to medical school. She was already going to go to medical school, but she decided her specialty was going to be oncology. And she is now a radiation oncologist at a cancer center in a major hospital. And all of that she would attribute to her grandmother, who raised her at a very young age. So thank you for sharing that.
Awesome.
Thank you. It makes me think of her as well, and what a wonderful experience that was. So do we have Lorraine? Is Lorraine?
Here I am.
Hi, Lorraine. Okay.
Greetings from Orlando.
Great.
Well, I, like her, also was raised on a farm and grew up to be a very hard worker. I was the oldest of 5 children. And when I graduated from college, I decided that my life had been so touched and influenced by a campus ministry that was on a campus that I wanted to join their ministry. And so I did that. And for the first 6 years, I got married. For the first 6 years, had a thriving ministry on a college campus. Go Clemson Tigers. And I just poured myself into my ministry, to the community, to the church we were involved in, and just loved my life. And then I had 4 children, and my husband was transferred to the headquarters of our ministry, and I decided to take a backseat role in the ministry, and still was involved, but just pour myself into raising our children. I was, on every PTA committee, you can just imagine. But then I became an empty nester about 5 years ago, and was asked by our staff to come to headquarters and work full time as I wanted to, but honestly didn't know what I could do at headquarters. What was there for me? And for about 2 years, I cried almost every day on my way to work. I hated to go to work so badly because I was doing things like data entry or planning little events, things that they could find for me to do, but nothing out of my passions or strengths. And then one day, one of the directors saw me in the hallway and said, "Hey, how are you doing?" And I started crying. And I said, "I'm doing terrible. I really don't like coming to work. This is really, really hard for me because I don't know what to do." And she said, "Oh my gosh, I saw you do this and I saw you do that. come work on my team. And so I did. I was transferred to her team. And this woman just literally opened the world up to me. And she figured out through Strength Finders and some other tools what my passions and strengths were, and just turned me loose on some projects that I could pour myself into and really save my life. Now when I go to work, I can't wait to get there. And I'm so grateful for her. In fact, the Thanksgiving that happened, that was my Thanksgiving thing around the table. This is what I'm thankful for. Because I so much wanted to love work, but I really didn't. And she made all the difference in that for me.
Yeah, thank you, Lorraine. That's a great story. And it's another example. This is an example of what we call a motivating positive influence leader, someone who sees something in you that maybe you didn't see in yourself. Thank you for that. And
oh my gosh, that whole chapter is underlined in my book. I love it.
Thank you for that. And also, I'm hearing role model in there too, that this is somebody who was a role model for you as well. And so thank you, and thank you all for those great stories, because they kind of reinforce the stories that we've collected over the course of our research and what's included in the book. So I think we need to kind of move on a little bit now and move on to the next slide, next question. Becky?
Sorry about that, dealing with some behind the scenes. So let's talk about why you wrote this book and a little bit about your creative process.
Okay, so let me tell you how this really started. A person who was very important to me in my life, a man named Bill, who was first was a client and then morphed into a friendship that lasted 25, 30 years. I got a notice that he had passed away and there was going to be a memorial for him. And I was preparing myself to go to that memorial. And I began to think about his influence on me, that he was an enormous positive influence on me because he saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. I came in as a team building consultant. He wanted to convert to a team-based organization, and I helped him do that. And 2 years later, he said to me, now I want to do customer service training because all of our people have some kind of customer contact, whether it's directly in the field or by phone. I said, Bill, I don't know anything about customer service. You know, I can help you find somebody. He said, you'll learn. And that's all he said to me. So I learned and I did it. And he went on to do other things like that, where he simply, he helped me grow out of what I thought was this box that I was in. I thought it was an okay box. I was happy to be a team building consultant. But anyway, I said to myself, I think that there's probably a lot of other people that have had this positive influence in their life, and that maybe there's something to that, and maybe we can collect information about their stories and their experiences and maybe catalog that and maybe write a book about that. I had no intentions of ever writing again. I'd already written many books, and I really was not motivated to write another book. But I thought, gee, this sounds really interesting. So I came back home. I called, you know, the person I respect the most in terms of his knowledge of leadership and management. And that would be my son, Michael. And Michael said to me, what did he say?
Okay, I was waiting for that. So this was over 3 years ago. I was actually, I was heading into an extended garden leave. And I think if I recall correctly, my father and I were having dinner in New York. So I worked in New York at that time, and shared what he just shared with you all. And the concept for this book immediately resonated with me. And my first reaction was, when I think of successful people that I know, measured by any metric that probably matters, and the people I most admire, I think they all could and would point to someone or perhaps several people who have helped them along the way. And I think that was the dinner pretty much that night. We were just brainstorming around the idea, and that this really hasn't been properly covered. At least we didn't think so. So, and for the people I know well, I could even recall them telling me about a particular person, commonly a boss, a colleague, more so parents, coaches, teachers, who made all the difference in their life. And I knew this story, obviously, from my father that he just recounted and shared with that night, but also former managers who I admired so much. And so quickly, I think it was even the next day, I just started just Googling famous people whom I admired. And they revealed very similar experiences. The most iconic actors of our time all point to someone that an actor before them who had influenced them or even motivated them to pursue a career. Just recently, I was reading about Dr. Fauci, and he's no exception. Dr. Fauci actually points to a gentleman, Dr. Sheldon Wolf, as what he said is the single most important person in his career. And he described him as this. He said he was the collaborator on Fauci's breakthrough research. He was the best man at his wedding, and he was older, and the role model that Fauci once called my professional father, my mentor, my closest friend. We continue to just stumble across stories like this, and we say, well, there's probably a great story to tell here, but there's real research and real work to do that we can share with more people. So let's go see what we can find out. And that was my reaction to that conversation.
Yeah. So essentially what we did was to interview some 50 people across a wide range of jobs and industries and gender and race and national origin, and asking them essentially the same thing. Tell us about this person without whom you would not be where you are today. And people started pouring out these stories just as the types that we heard here earlier. And we were actually looking initially for a profile. What are the characteristics that are associated with a positive influence leader? And we started to get a rather diverse group of answers. And so it didn't fit into a nice profile, but we realized that there's lots of ways that you can be a positive influence leader, all of them different, but all of them helpful. And so that's where we ended up with, and we're going to be talking about these 4 different types or 4 different styles of positive influence leader. And then people started also telling us about negative influences, because some people said to us, don't you want to know about the negative influences in my life? Because I've had a lot of those. And we said, yeah, we want to hear about those kinds of things. And then also Michael said, I think we should be asking about whether people pay it forward or not. And because I think that if you have benefited from a positive influence leader, you're likely to pay it forward with all those people that you encounter in your life and your work. And so we asked that as well. And the final thing I think it's very, very important to know, and Becky was very involved with us in this decision. This book was supposed to be released in May of this year. We put it on hold because of the virus, because we just didn't feel that people were going to be interested in anything other than something that had to do with the virus or the financial markets. So we put it on hold until after Labor Day, as we're right now. But Michael turned to me and said, Dad, let's not think of this as a problem, but let's think of this as an opportunity to apply what we know and what we have learned about a positive influence leader to a positive influence leader in a time of crisis. And that's what we did. We augmented the manuscript with a fairly detailed chapter on positive influence leader in a time of crisis. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later on. So why don't we move on to talk about the 4 types of positive influence leaders.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing about these 4 types.
Okay, so it's the supportive positive influence leader, the teacher positive influence leader, the motivating leader, and the role model positive influence leader. So let me just talk very briefly about the supportive positive influence leader. This is the person that, and you've heard some examples of this already. I'm here for you. I've got your back. I can help you. I can support you. I'm not going to do it for you, but I will be here to support you. I'll be here when you need me. I will help you understand the obstacles. I won't solve the problem for you, but I'll teach you how to solve that problem. Give you a couple of quick examples. Jennifer told us about her mother, who was a positive influence on her, who encouraged her, nudged her, pushed her, and encouraged her interest in history. Her mother was a history buff. She bought an old historic home and restored it to its original status. Jennifer went on to major in history in college and ended up now, guess what, as a senior curator at the Smithsonian Museum of American History. And she says, and this is something she told us, her mother said to her, don't let anyone stop you from doing anything just because you've never done it before. Don't let anyone stop you from doing something just because you've never done it before. And that informed her life and caused her to get to where she is right now, which is in a perfect place. And her mother later said to her, you have my dream job. So she could actually say, I'm living the dream. Betsy, and by the way, we interviewed a number of women of a certain age who told us about they felt some of their opportunities were limited, either by self-imposed limitations by culture and society, or by outside influences who directly said, that's not really a career for a woman. Betsy went to college and majored in theater, and assuming, because she was a woman, that what she would do would be writing and directing and acting. But the curriculum included a requirement that she take a course in technical theater. And so one day in this class, her instructor, Jim, said to her, Betsy, I want you to go up on that ladder and string lights above the stage. And Betsy said, I grew up in an apartment with my family. We didn't even own a ladder. So she said, the thought of getting up on that ladder, going that high, and if you can visualize a stage, was daunting. And Jim said, Betsy, you're going to do this. You can do this. And she did. She strung those lights. And after that, she learned how to use power tools, and she built sets, and she could put a sound system in on stage, and she went on to a career in the technical aspects of theater. So positive, supportive influence leader has your back and supports you along the way. So Michael, you can talk about the teacher leader.
Yeah, the teacher leader naturally is the person that teaches you the things you need to learn, but also they also have the ability to create in you a desire to learn, and they are the people that teach you the skills and the knowledge, but also how to do things the right way, and how to learn from your mistakes. Earlier, I had mentioned a former boss of mine, Mike, who while somewhat supportive, was really a teacher influence leader. And he essentially said, you don't really know anything, so I have to teach it to you. And he was completely right. But we encountered many others. There was a teacher, Leslie, a public school teacher, who told us about a former professor who she said was so passionate about teaching that he inspired her to want to be a great one herself. In fact, devoted her life to that, largely influenced by her former professor. It wasn't only the practical teaching skills, but it was what she said. It was really his energy and his charisma, enthusiasm that made me want to be a great teacher also. So another one that I'd experienced an entirely different field in the hedge fund space. So one of the sort of longtime hedge fund managers, Mark, who's been doing this at the time, been doing this over 35 years in the industry. He told me about a story about essentially a contemporary hedge fund manager, Paul, who taught him that. He said to him, Mark, when you make mistakes, it seems like you agonize. You spend more of your time agonizing over one single mistake that you make. But in reality, what you should be doing is, number one, learn from those mistakes. What are the takeaways from the mistake that you can learn from, build on, move forward? But even more important, or equally important, you got to start forgiving yourself for the mistakes that you make. And this is no rookie. It's just said, if you're not able to forgive yourself, you're not able to make the next decision. Learn from the mistake you made, forgive yourself. And Mark shared with me that he often thinks of this advice from Paul every time he finds himself struggling with an investment decision that he'd make, whether it materialized or not, but especially when they don't, to say, okay, what did I learn from that? And how can I move on and forgive myself? That's the teacher.
And
let's move to motivating.
Motivating positive influence later is, we've had some examples of that one. This is the person that inspires you, that pushes you, that moves you, that finds that something within you that perhaps you didn't see yourself, your true north, your purpose in life, what I call sometimes your sweet spot. This is who you are. And as I gave you the example early on of Larry, the person who found that sweet spot in me, saw that in me that I didn't see in myself, and set the conditions for me to be successful. He didn't throw me out there and say, Glenn, there's going to be a 2-day class down south. Why don't you teach that 2-day class and I'll just sit in the back and observe? No, he didn't do that. He created a situation where I only had to teach 2 hours about something that he knew that I really knew and could teach. And as a result, I was successful at it. So the motivating leader sees that something in you and creates the conditions for you to be successful. I want to take this just for one quick example from history that maybe some of you can resonate with. It's actually from art history. Some of you know that Paul Gauguin and Vincent van Gogh were friends. They often stayed together in the south of France. They painted together a lot. And Gauguin was really a mentor and a positive influence leader for Van Gogh. And one day he said to Van Gogh, he said, why don't you paint from your imagination, from your memory, rather than trying to create an exact picture of what you're seeing? In other words, create an impression of what you're seeing rather than a photograph of it. And of course, as many of you know, these two artists, along with a number of others, were the leaders of the Impressionist movement. And it's absolutely interesting how they've influenced each other in that way. So that's the motivating positive influence leader.
Yeah, the role model, this was my favorite part and most fun part of the book for me, was the role model positive influence leader, because we got to spend a lot of time on famous people as well that we would all know. And as we know, the role model provides that powerful example from which you can learn how to be successful just by observing them. And you may choose to closely emulate that person, although you may also benefit, like many do, just extracting certain traits from that individual and integrating into your own and creating your own unique style, which seem to be more common. But there were, we are all aware of many of these famous examples. And one of my favorite ones was in just doing some research on Michael Jordan, one of probably the most famous, most successful basketball player in history. So what I learned two things here. One is that he influenced an entire generation of basketball players. Many of them, Kobe Bryant being an example of this, point to Michael Jordan. In fact, it was in this documentary, The Last Dance, where Kobe Bryant, the late Kobe Bryant, said he pointed to Michael Jordan as his role model. But in fact, he stated that Kobe wouldn't have become the player that he became without the influence of Jordan. And that influence started when he was a child living overseas, largely in Italy, before he had ever met Jordan. And later they became friends, and he had a big influence in the early part of his career. Interesting enough, the late Kobe Bryant also, he went on to influence himself an entire generation of basketball players, many of whom are playing today. This is this concept we'll get to a little bit later of pay it forward. He clearly paid forward what he had learned and how he'd been influenced by Jordan. And I think the most effective role model is very aware. Both of these guys were very aware that people are watching, and they're aware that their actions must be aligned with their words. They walk the talk. So while there are 4 different types that we get into in the book of role models, just as an example, that inspirational type of role model, someone like Oprah Winfrey, is a positive role model to people she has yet to meet, because she has been so open about sharing her personal story. I have one interesting one. I know we're coming up on the time, but I think it's worth sharing. So there's a woman that we interviewed, a senior executive named Ann in financial services, and she points to one of the more high-profile women in the industry, Sally Krawcheck, as a powerful example of what she said to us, which was, it's okay to be a woman and a mom and still succeed on Wall Street. And the story that Ann told me was that she was once on a national call with other executives and other leaders. There had to be at least 100 people on the call at a very large organization. And she said, Sally's leading the call and she's speaking. And as she's speaking, she clearly becomes distracted by something, and she lets everyone know that she has to put this call on hold, which Ann had said, I've been doing this at that time, 20 years. I've never seen anything like this. She puts the call on hold for what she said is going to be a moment. She comes back 5 minutes later. And 5 minutes on a call like this is an eternity. And she came back and she shared with everyone on the call what she was doing. She said, that was my young daughter who called, and she asked me which lipstick she should wear, the purple or the pink. And she said, listen, the reason why I took that call is because when I took this job, my daughter was worried that she wouldn't have the same access. We wouldn't have the same relationship. She said to her daughter, I'll commit every time you call, I'll pick up the phone. And Ann said, look, that type of genuine transparency really endeared Sally to many up and coming women leaders. And it was, really game changing for Ann, who went on to having her own, thriving executive career.
That's a really powerful story. So I'm betting that some of the people who are listening are wondering how they may be able to tell what type of leader they are out of these 4 positive influence leader types that you've described.
So before we do that, let's just talk real quick about the transformational positive influence leader. What we say is that if you want to aspire to be transformational, the transformational leader is situational, which means that they take a look at the situation, take a look at you, take a look at the team, and say, what is the type of leadership that is needed right now? And they do it. They're able to easily and fluidly move from one style to the next as the situation requires. They're not stuck in one thing and only able to be a leader, a teacher leader, for example. They're able to do any of the things as the situation requires. And that is what we aspire to. And so I wanted to make that particular point because it's an important one when it comes to putting this all together and being the most effective positive influence leader that you can be. So let's talk about, how do you find out what type of a leader you are? That's a great question, Becky. And in the back of the book, some of you already have the book, you know that in the back of the book, there is a self-assessment survey, Parker Positive Influence Leader Survey, in which you fill out. It's 18 items, and you get a score for all 4 of those positive influence leaders. And your highest score is the one that we call your primary style. That's the one you use most often. And but you may use the strengths of all four of those styles. All of us have the ability to use the strengths of all four styles. We happen to use one more than one of the others. There's also going to be a 360 version of that survey, so you can hand it out to colleagues on your team, members of your team, colleagues, your people above you, people throughout the organization, other stakeholders, suppliers, and get feedback and match your self-assessment with the assessment of people who look at you from a different perspective. And we can say a little bit more about that. But that's how you find out what type of, what style you have. And of course, taking that information and reading the chapter about that particular style would reinforce that. So yeah, let's move on. We got to move a little more quickly. Paying it forward, I think, as we said, we pretty much had the idea that people who benefited from a positive influence leader would tend to pay it forward with people that they encountered, and that was the case. We found basically two ways people did that. They incorporated that generally into everybody that they encountered. They tended to pay it forward. Some people could point to specific people that they encountered in the course of their work and could tell stories about a particular person that they encountered where they were able to pay it forward with them. For example, Gina, who was a woman that we interviewed, she's a nurse educator with a major university nursing program, and she encountered this young woman as a student she knew was doing well and was going to be a great nurse, but had great difficulty with the formal examinations. And so what Gina did was to create a practicum for her where she could demonstrate those nursing skills in an environment where she actually worked and lived. She was going to work in a community health center in a low-income neighborhood, and she did the practicum there, did great, and she came back and was successful in the course. So that's the way Gina paid it forward, and we have obviously lots of other examples of paying it forward. I just want to say one thing. Do you know where the idea, this is a little trivia, where did the idea of paying it forward come from? No, it didn't come from Kevin Spacey in the movie Paying It Forward. Kevin Spacey did not invent paying it forward. Actually was originated by a man who originated a lot of things in this country, Benjamin Franklin. Because one day a young man came to him and wanted to borrow some money. And Benjamin Franklin said, okay, I will give you this money, but you don't repay the money to me. I want you, the next time someone asks you for money, I want you to give them that money with the same stipulation that they in turn pay it forward with another person. So you can walk away today with some trivia that Benjamin Franklin originated the concept of pay it forward. So let's move on to talk about negative influences, because there's a lot of fun here with
this was not something, as I recall, that we anticipated, and it was right. Unfortunately maybe more common than we would have expected, but it was important. Most of us have come across negative people, and how do we cope? People cope with negativity that they encounter. I interviewed one person who said his greatest positive influence was his mother. His greatest negative influence was his father. Wow. So I said, how did you live that way? He goes, all I could tell you is that I wanted to be my mother, but I used my father as motivation because he never thought I would amount to anything. So we're a little pressed for time, so I'll just try to condense this a bit. I mean, one of the more famous examples, of course, is Charles Darwin, who was considered at one point by his family and his teachers to be an abject failure. And he was even asked to leave one of his schools and dropped out. And his father sort of lectured him about what a loser he was, and he didn't care about anything, and he was a disgrace. And of course, later at Cambridge, he found his true north in a course on natural history, and the rest is history. He became, he was influenced by John Stevens Henslow, and his life and our knowledge of evolution changed forever. So he was one of those individuals that was able to convert a negative influence into a positive outcome. But some people are lucky. Like early on, they were told they can do something, and they believed when they first tried to do everything that they tried, or tried out for a team or for the school play. And unfortunately, we all encounter other people though who say things to us like, that's not a great career for a woman, or what are you going to do with a degree in philosophy or art, or it's a long shot, and people are able to turn that negativity into a positive. One example is Jerry, an African-American man that we interviewed, who told us about a meeting with his high school guidance counselor who gave him the sort of, are you kidding? Are you serious look when he told her that he wanted to go to college and have a double major in engineering and economics. And Jerry took it as a challenge, and he said, I'm going to prove her wrong. And he did. And he went on to have this incredible career as an engineer and an engineering manager at GE. So I think we have a story from the group, if Drew Factor is on, has a story to share on negative influence.
Sure, I'll bring Drew over in just a second.
Okay.
I thought you had a bit more to say, so I'm bringing you over as a panelist, Drew, if you're willing to share your story. She should be here. He should be here. Drew, are you with us? Are you able to unmute?
Hey, Drew.
Hi, guys.
Hey.
Can you be brief, Drew? Tell us that story brief, because it actually makes the point that Michael was referencing.
Right. I'm a physician who worked for a company for about 20 years. And I had asked to do some work outside of the group. And I won't go into the details of what happened, but the president said, we can't do that for you, Drew. And I said, can you tell me why? And they said, well, leadership sees you as a loose cannon. And I said, well, that's interesting, because no one told me about their impression of me. Can you help sort of set up a meeting with this person so that I could discuss this and understand where they're coming from? And she said, I'd have no knowledge of how to do that. You're really on your own. And when she said you're on your own, I said, I guess I am on my own. And I just realized from that point on, even if they're not leaders around me, I have to be the leader of my own career. And even though there have not been particular leaders, there have been people who've instilled upon me what you've told about, is this belief. And I carry this stone that, I don't know how people can see this. It says believe. And I carry this in my my pocket every day, just to carry that belief in me, even if someone isn't around me to do that.
Thank you.
So,
yeah,
that's great, Drew. Thank you.
And so that's a great story, because that also demonstrates the idea of that Michael talked about, is taking the negative influence as a challenge and doing something about it. And there's a lot of other examples which are in the book that are funny and sad. And some of them are very sad, and but you realize how people developed coping strategies, and we catalog those coping strategies in the book. So we wanted to say a brief word about positive influence leader in a time of crisis, because as I said, we augmented the manuscript with this. And we share a number of different things, but we wanted to go through 5 different, what we consider to be critical leader behaviors in a time of crisis, and just summarize those for you very, very quickly. The first one is to be open and authentic. We love a quote by Mark Cuban. Many of you know who Mark Cuban is. He's a very famous investor and successful entrepreneur. He owns the Dallas Mavericks NBA basketball team. He's on Shark Tank. And he said early on, back in March, he said, what you do during this time, meaning the time of the crisis, time of the virus, what you do during this time will define your brand for decades. If we could even edit that to say what you do now will define you and your organization for decades. So, and he said people are watching. So being open and authentic is to say that a crisis is not something to be managed. It's something requires an authentic leader who's willing to say, this is what I know. This is what I know right now. This is what we're planning to do, but I'm operating right now with incomplete information. This is what many people said back in March. We think of Chuck Robbins of Cisco, who was way out in front of this. And of course, he had the advantage of having WebEx as well at his disposal. And so, because people, and then later on, I may come back to you and say, we've got more information now, and this is what we're able to do now, and this is what our plans are going forward. And so being open and authentic and not trying to deny or deceive, it's all going to go away, it's not that bad, it'll all be over soon, not the way to handle it. To be open and authentic is the key thing. So let's go on.
Yeah, and to be clear and specific, right? Especially a crisis like this that's health related, or even if it was legal or political, it's critical to be very clear, because as you said, people are listening and they're watching to what and how you're saying things. So I used Fauci as the example earlier. Some love Sanjay Gupta, CNN, to give clear and specific information about the virus. Both of them have this unique ability to clearly explain these very complex medical information and this arcane scientific information to non-scientists like many of us in a way that can be understood and, most important, practically applied.
And number 3 is to listen, to ask questions, to listen some more, and to respond. The key skill here is to be listen and be accessible, be open to questions from people in the organization, respond to them as best that you can in the moment, because again, this impacts your authenticity. So we all know about the virtual meetings and the like. The more you can do that, the more you can do one-on-ones by phone and by Zoom with people to find out what their concerns are. How's it going when you're working at home? How does that work out? What's the degree of collaboration? And what's the degree of productivity that's going on right now? And how can I help respond to that? So that's a critical one as well.
So we're coming up on the hour. There is a couple of others that you could find in the book. Why don't we skip to the conclusion?
We want to make sure that everyone knows how they can learn more about you in the book. And there are a bunch of additional resources related to the book. Glenn, do you want to tell us about those briefly?
Okay, so briefly, as I said, the self-assessment survey, which is in the back of the book, will be published separately by HRD Press as a booklet form. So it makes it easier to use in meetings. There'll also be a 360 version of it that'll be published in a separate booklet, again, so it can be used in leadership development and team building activities. And a third booklet will be for a leader's guide on how to use all of this information. So it'll be sample exercises and activities and directions on how to use all of these things, because Michael and I are both practitioners. We did this work, we did this research so that people will take action and use the information. We didn't do this just to, that would be interesting to read about and to think about. Isn't interesting that people have positive influences. We want to create more positive influence leaders, and we want to create more positive influence organizations. So that's why we did this. That's why we invested all of this time and effort in putting all this information together. And by the way, while we made the book brief and accessible and easy to read so that people will begin to use the information, because that's the payoff for us, is that when you use this information, and we hope, of course, that you will communicate with us, tell us your stories, ask us questions about how to use the information. We want to hear your positive influence stories, some of your negative stories as well. And I know I want to thank again many other people who agreed to participate, as some of our people did here. We thank you for, we're sorry we couldn't get all of your stories on, but we will communicate directly with each of you who agreed to tell your story, because we want to hear more about those stories. So you can learn more about positive influence at thepositiveinfluenceleader.com. You can also communicate with Michael and I. It would be Michael at thepositiveinfluenceleader.com or Glenn at thepositiveinfluenceleader.com. Okay.
Wow.
Anything else?
I just want to thank everyone for being on. It was a privilege to be with you today. As you said, you could reach us at positiveinfluenceleader.com, and remember to be a positive influence leader.
And thank you, Becky, and thank you all for participating.